Hello there, this is Jason with Divine Frustrations, and I'm going to be talking to you today about a concern that was presented to me a little while ago, and it has to do with the number of various Christian denominations. The person who presented this concern to me was just, frustrated about how many different variations there are of Christianity in the world. Of course, we know that there are so many different Protestant denominations, and then, of course, you have Roman Catholicism, and even groups that would fall outside of the main churches, Protestant and Catholic, and still different variations. And so they were just, trying to understand how can that be when everybody is claiming to believe in Jesus and follow the Bible? How can you have so many different variations and forms and expressions of Christianity? So, in trying to understand this and explore this, it's important to note that even in the New Testament, even in the early stages of the Christian movement, there were glimpses that people were going to be seeing things differently, and as a result, things would be done differently. And that's really the essence of what the Christian denominations that we know of today is representing, is the fact that people believe differently and that they practice things differently. And that's really the heart of it. So, a couple of New Testament examples to think about. For example, in Acts chapter 15, there's a situation where a disagreement occurs between Paul and Barnabas. And there was a situation beforehand involving John Mark. And so there was a discussion about whether or not he should be taken with them on the journey that they were about to venture on. So Barnabas says yes, they should take him, and Paul was saying no, they shouldn't. And so the passage goes on to say, it's at the end of chapter 15, that says that the contention between them became so sharp that they ended up parting ways. So Barnabas ended up taking John Mark with him, and Paul ended up taking Silas. So, what do you have there? You have a situation where two early Christian leaders saw something different, and as a result, they parted ways, they went their separate ways. And some commentators would say that was actually a good thing because now you had two different teams going out instead of just one, and that would allow them to spread the message of the gospel more widely that way. So, but at the heart of it, there was a disagreement, and that disagreement led them to part ways, but they continued on serving the Lord. And so, what we can learn from that is just because you have a situation where believers decide to go in a different direction, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad thing. As a matter of fact, good can come from that, just like we see in Acts chapter 15. But then at the same time, there is another situation that is discussed in First Corinthians chapter 1. And in that particular discussion, Paul is pleading with the believers at that time, particularly in chapter 1, verse 10. He pleads with them to speak the same thing, to be of the same mind, and that there would be no divisions among them. And then he goes on to explain why he was pleading with them, because he heard that there were believers who were saying that they were of Paul, they were of Peter, they were of Christ. And so they were seeking to identify with certain individuals. And that, of course, is what Paul was trying to address. And so his ultimate message is that you don't have to be aligned with him. You don't have to be aligned with Peter. The most important thing is that you align yourself with Christ. And that's the only person that you should be focusing on, not the individual apostles who may have brought you the gospel. So once again, what's the message? The point is that the focus needs to be on the person's connection with Christ and not an individual believer or an individual church leader. So we could say that in the passage in First Corinthians chapter 1, the real issue was the apparent immaturity that the believers had at that time. And that is ultimately what caused them to respond into the things that the way that they did. And so what Paul did was address that by saying that focus on Christ, focus on your connection with him, and the other people don't really matter. So, how does that translate to all of the different denominations that we know of today? Well, we can say that even though there are a lot, and even though there are a number of differences among them, for the most part, there is a sense of unity, even with all of the different denominations that exist. Generally speaking, there is a sense of unity as it pertains to the basics of Christianity, the core message of the gospel, the identity of Christ, the place of the Bible in the life of the believer. So there is a lot of unity as it pertains to those basics. The differences tend to be more on secondary matters. Some people may even consider them superficial. But with those differences, it's really a matter of a lot of times the practices that some people enjoy, the traditions that people embrace in church life, not necessarily an entirely different understanding of Christianity or the Christian message. And so, with that understanding, we can appreciate the diversity of Christian expressions in the churches. And we can appreciate the various ways in which people understand different teachings in the Bible. But at the same time, we can value the underlying unity that most believers would share. And so, whether a person goes to a Baptist church, a Methodist church, or Presbyterian, for the most part, the believers there would tell you the same thing, and that is they believe in Christ, they're following the Bible. And even though things may be done differently in these various churches, there is a sense in which, at the root of it all, is the basic Christian message, the basic gospel, and the basic commitment to following Christ. So, of course, there are ways to learn more about the different denominations if a person is interested in doing that. The most important thing is that a believer is going to a church, not so much thinking about the denomination, but going to a church that they believe they can grow as a result of being with that congregation. They believe that they are teaching the scriptures, they believe that what they are learning is sound teaching, and those are the things that matter, not so much the label that's used, the denomination, but are they growing as a result? Can they see what that church stands for in the scriptures? And if they have peace about those areas, then that is something that can be celebrated. So we see glimpses of what would later become denominations. We see those in the New Testament, but again, they're not necessarily a bad thing as long as believers are growing, they're not dividing over immature issues, and that they're ultimately seeking to grow in Christ regardless of what church they happen to be affiliated with.